Ben. Thanks for joining us. Do you want to just start off and tell us a little bit about yourself, like where you grew up and what your childhood was like?
Yeah, my name is Ben Carter. I'm a commercial director. I'm based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. And yeah, I grew up in the South here in North Carolina. So I was born in Chicago, but spent all my time here. And honestly, I had a very, what I guess would be average, I don't know how to say that any better, but just middle class average upbringing. Parents worked, went to school, played sports, played music, things like that. Like I was fortunate to have a very normal upbringing. But I think, I think a lot of who I am now is kind of shaped by that, because it was just it was an open book, and I wasn't really, my dad was like a big sports guy, and he was really great at sports, and that was the most important thing to him. But as time went on, and I guess, revealed to my parents that I was more interested in art and music and things like that, they were incredibly receptive to that, and they encouraged it. And I think the fact that my dad didn't know anything about art or music or film or anything, I think the fact that he knew nothing made it even better, because when I got good at anything, he was like blown away. So like learn to play piano, learn to play guitar, whatever my first like artistic endeavors were, he was like, whoa, because all he knew was baseball and basketball and stuff like that. So yeah, very normal upbringing. My parents are from the North though. So growing up in the South, I got, I don't know if you've been to the South in the United States, but it's, I think to people like yourself, maybe who are from Australia or anyone who's maybe from Europe, they come to the South for the first time. And they're like, what the hell is this? It can be an interesting part of the country, but there's a lot of personality here. There's a lot of character to North Carolina. So I think, I've traveled all around this country. I've been to almost all 50 states, and I always felt myself coming home to North Carolina and being like, you know what? This actually is high on the list. Like there aren't a ton of other places in the United States that I would be like, oh, I gotta go live there. So, but yeah, I don't think it's also not one of those places though that shapes you a ton. Like I don't think my personality and my attitude or my work or anything is like heavily shaped, other than the influence of like NASCAR and the things I grew up, consuming. But yeah, it's a great place. So yeah, North Carolina is and always has been home.
Because, yeah, like the people from the South or like those states, I imagine, like they're very polite and yes, sir, thank you, sir, like that kind of thing. You don't have the southern accent that I can tell. But
I didn't get, my parents are from Indiana. So like, and I got no accent. I didn't get the Midwest accent. I'm just sort of somewhere in between, I guess. But yeah, there is that Southern politeness, but there's also a stigma of like the opposite. So I think a lot of people, they meet me when I'm from the South and I travel for jobs and stuff, and they're like, oh wow, no accent, and you're not like you didn't bring a gun with you to set, or like, just the stereotypes that exist about people from the South. But it's been good to me, so I'm still here.
What about when you were like a kid? What kind of like films were you watching that kind of inspired you to go towards like that, filmmaking route?
I think the first one that I really remember, being fascinated by, in more than just like I'm a child, I like things that children like, was the first and second Ninja Turtles movie. And like, bear with me because I know that's hilarious, but like, they were made in North Carolina. They're shot in Wilmington. There's a studio in Wilmington, North Carolina, out on the coast that used to make major motion pictures and a lot of big TV shows and stuff. And now it's more just for commercials and episodic sort of stuff. But I remember watching that movie so much and being like, feeling like it was low budget, but not really totally understanding. And then as an adult later, I remember maybe 10 years ago, I went back and watched it for the first time in forever. And I was like, wow, there are some holes in this. So like that movie just had an impact on me because I watched it so many times. I was able as a child to take notice of like stunts and take notice of, like not technical things on the film side, because I didn't have the wherewithal to know what they were, but like just the process and just the fact that there was like, oh, okay, like this wall's going to fall apart and a bunch of guys are going to come through this wall, like the blocking and the actors and I just remember being aware of it, but not knowing a thing about it. But I think the first movie that like really made me blown away by the experience and like how you can feel things in a movie is probably Jurassic Park. And I know a lot of people my age maybe were impacted the same way by that movie, but I just, when you take a little bit of that childhood love of dinosaurs, because I would have been 11 when it came out, maybe 10, and it just blew my mind. But the scale of it and how they could take something so seemingly childlike and make it adult, but also make it have emotion attached to it. And I was too young to have the emotional intelligence to know why. I was like, why am I going to shed a tear over the dinosaur that I just got to see for the first time? I had that, like when Alan Grant gets out of the top of the Jeep and is blown away by the first dinosaur, like that was 10-year-old me being like, I knew it was fake, but it just had an impact on me. So I've probably seen that movie close to 100 times throughout my life. But yeah, I think those two, for very different reasons, had an impact on me early on, making me take notice of the process or the way that moving images or movies or short films or anything could just make people have an emotional response to them.
Yeah, and I think the Ninja Turtles, it was like practical as well. Like they weren't CGI characters, where the newer versions are like CGI, and I think it just builds like a barrier to be like, that's fake or that's a cartoon. Whereas when you see it in real life, you're like, oh wow, like that's actual.
Like they were these clearly fake characters that I've been watching in animations for years and years, and all of a sudden they were almost human and they were right in front of me. But like it was just low budget enough that I was like, all right, they're doing something here. Like this is clearly fake. I'm into it. I got no problem with it. I mean, these are incredibly talented people working on this type of stuff, but like, I don't know. It was just the first time I felt like I was watching a movie and there were people making this fake world. Like that's the only awareness I had of it, was that it was fake and people were making it. And that was really strange to me. So side funny note, the building at the end that Shredder falls off of, I can't believe we're talking about this, but the building at the end that he falls off of is like one of the tallest buildings in downtown Wilmington. And that's where I went to college, the University of North Carolina at Wilmington. And there was a bar on top called Level 5, and we used to go there all the time. So college age me was always like, go have a beer at the building that Shredder fell off of. So it's silly, but that's it.
So I think like because it was filmed in your town, like you were able to see the areas. Was that what kind of made you realize like this is a movie, somebody's making it? Like, because some kids will watch a film and not even realize that there are people making it. They think it's like a documentary or it's like actual real life. Or
it's supposed to be New York City, and they used a lot of pieces of this very small. I mean, Wilmington is not a big city at all. It's a very small city. It only exists because it's been a port. It was the biggest port in Wilmington, or in the state of North Carolina. So, so you start realizing like they used some of these city blocks and these areas to make it feel like we were in New York City. And as a child, you're less aware, but then you grow up and you go to New York City. And then if you happen to see that movie on TV, you're like, oh, okay, this is definitely not New York City. But at least I was aware that it's like, it was the first time of just being like, they gotta make this work with what they have. So, yeah. And then of course you go back and watch it as an adult, and it's clearly they're working with only the things they have. So which I'm used to. So I have a lot of respect for that.
And then I think, yeah, Jurassic Park took it to the next level, I guess, in terms of scale, where they're still using like those practical, like puppet type characters, but then you see it in a giant form. And then they introduced CGI, a good mix between CGI and practical effects, and it makes it even more realistic, I guess.
The shock and awe of the whole thing, but then paired with the fact that they could, if you paint the T-Rex as a bad guy throughout, but at the end I could feel sorry for it. Like I remember at the end of that movie being like feeling sad that this little world is crumbling around this terrifying animal, but they're all driving away to go to the helicopters to get off the island. But I remember feeling bad for the T-Rex, and I was like, man, what? I shouldn't feel bad for the bad guy. So yeah, that was a surprising lesson in the power of a movie.
And then when was the first time you like picked up a camera and kind of started making your own projects?
I'm a real late bloomer. When I was in college, I had a bunch of friends that were in the film school program at Wilmington, because it was so close to the studio, and the studio was still really active at the time. They were making a show called One Tree Hill in town that was really big on TV. And so the guys that were in the film program there, I would work on projects with them just for fun. Like I was a business major only because I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. Like I was in a band and I was playing music and I wanted to get a record deal and go on tour, and that was my focus. So I just went to school because I was told I was supposed to go to school. So I wasn't a very good student. I didn't really care to be there, but it was just one of those things where you're young and you're like, if I don't do this, everyone's going to think I've got no direction or whatever. But yeah, my first involvement would have been doing projects with them. So I would act in their student films. I would do ADR with them. We would make music for some of their films. I would do literally anything. I would go when they would shoot and I would lug gear around and watch them bring these things that they had written to life, where I was more familiar with that process on the music side of things. So then it wasn't until like eventually when I dropped out of college, my band got a record deal and I went on tour for about 7 or 8 years of my life. And I think my first actual direct involvement in the process was we just used to film on mini DV tapes when we would tour. And then one of the guys in my band knew how to edit, so he would cut these sort of tour videos together and we would upload them to MySpace or YouTube or whatever platform was sort of we were using to get our stuff out in the world. So it was very like rough tour documentary type of stuff, but mixed with like Jackass and things like that, where we would make our tour manager like eat gross stuff or like, take his clothes off and run through a parking lot or whatever, just like dumb stuff you do when you're in your late teens and you are living in a van driving around the country. So yeah, like my first involvement was very informal, very loose, zero education behind it. It probably didn't become real until I have a friend that's one of my best friends is a really, really talented photographer. And I had sort of hit a time where my music career was dead ending a little bit and I was pretty beat up about it. And I think he could tell I needed an outlet creatively. And he offered to teach me how to take stills. And so I got a crash course from him on still photography. And then I did that professionally for 3 or 4 years, whether with him or working for him or on my own on the side doing freelance while I was bartending on the side to make money. And that was where I kind of learned like, oh, okay, like I can still create things that are spawned from my own ideas, just like making records. And I got that same fulfillment of what it felt like to take something from an idea in your head and then put that first piece of it together and watch it layer and layer, and that payoff. I was able to find that again with photography, because there was just nothing that in my life at the time that felt as good as taking like a song idea from nothing. And even if it's a demo, or even if you're in the studio and you cut drums and you're like, oh, this sounds pretty cool. And then you maybe do some guitars. You're like, oh, this is coming to life. And then you cut a vocal. And then I remember that first scratch mix that would come together in the studio on a song idea. Like it would almost bring tears to my eyes every time, because that was the first time you're like, wow, like I or we or whoever I'm working with, we just made this thing from nothing. So photography gave me that, but in a much quicker, it doesn't take as long to take a picture and get it out in the world as it does a record. So it gave me that feeling. So my initial visual storytelling was in still images.
And was there a time where you went, like, how did you transition from taking photos? Like, did you get a job like taking photos for somebody? Was that the first step, or did you go into making video next? Like, what was the next step?
To this day, one of my best friends and my executive producer at Whatnot Films, Eric Bridenstine, we finally linked up professionally because we've known each other since we were in high school. But professionally, we got together, and I got my start in team sports. So he was the creative director for the professional hockey team here in Charlotte. So his job was to, do it all, write, direct, shoot, edit, VFX, make an in-game show, graphic design, anything creative that needed to be done by that organization. It was his responsibility. So, and this is back in around like 2011 or 12. The need for video was just growing and growing, and the DSLR, revolution had sort of hit low budget filmmaking, and he was doing a documentary about some people from Charlotte that had been injured in the Boston Marathon bombing. And he's like, hey, I'm trying to tell these people's story because the team is going to rally around their foundation and try to raise some money to help them with all their medical bills, because the woman had like lost her leg and the husband had been injured as well. And it's a really bad situation. So he was like, will you come shoot this doc for me? And he's like, I'll direct it. I'll do the whole thing. And I was just like, yeah, I mean, I've turned the video mode on my 5D Mark II on a couple times. Yeah, sure, whatever. And obviously had no clue what I was doing. And we made a little short documentary for these people, and it helped them tell their story and raise some money. And it felt really great. It just felt great to make something like that. And so he hired me, and I worked full time in team sports for like 4 or 5 years. And, I know you talk to filmmakers, and I feel like you either come, if you're a DP or a director or, whatever, it doesn't matter what role you fulfill. Your editors, you either come from crew, so you're a crew person and you work your way up in a department, and then you maybe change departments, or you're self-taught, or you come from an in-house job. Mine was pretty much a combination of self-taught and in-house. I basically got paid a really shitty salary to teach myself how to make films. So he and I, over those years that we were there, made a ton of documentaries. We made comedy sketches, we made commercials, we did it all. And very little of it was good, but it was just me having an idea, him having an idea, us having an idea together and making it, and then stepping back when it was done and going like, all right, well, now I'll never, forget to put an ND filter on the camera ever again, or I'll never forget to do the audio. Like we did it all. So I got to screw up every department in filmmaking. But also I think that baseline of having one man banded it for so long, like I have that respect for every department now. When I go on my sets, and like I've lit so many things and I've gripped so many things and done sound and done all those things. So at least having that little bit of context, I try to keep that in my brain, just because I can now get to work with people that are actually good at those jobs. But having done it myself, also wouldn't trade that for anything.
Yeah, I think that's an important lesson to learn from your mistakes, but also to learn all the different roles so that you know exactly what every person does. And I remember David Fincher said something like that. He wants to know exactly what every person in the room does, so he can't get taken advantage of by other people's laziness. Like if they say, we need to do a certain thing, and they're like, we can't do it. And he's like, actually, you can with like the special Mitchell plate, and then you get this bit of equipment. And then that way, I think in like Alien 3, he kind of got messed over a lot and learned from there, like not to listen to the people who are paying for the movie. Like they said, don't work with your friends. And so he went in there, and he was like this young director, and everybody like resented him. So yeah, I think a good lesson is to learn from your mistakes and figure out like along the way. So like you mentioned, you're getting paid to basically have a film school by doing it.
Everything I do, I try to remember that, like, I'm going to screw it up. I'm not the best at what I do. But as long as I can walk away from a project and feel like I learned something, and if, you know, the people obviously that are paying me to make it, if they're happy, that's great, and a huge part of it. But from day one, the first pictures I took to the commercial I just wrapped, I screwed some stuff up, and I'm not afraid to admit it. But, you know, I guess you get better at hiding from everyone that you screwed some stuff up. It's not even screwing up. It's just like lessons learned. It's like, oh man, I asked for 20 extras in this scene when I should have asked for 50. Or I told my DP that we should put the camera here, and I was so confident in that, and now I'm not so confident in that decision. So it's a varying level of screwing things up.
And so talking about like decisions, like when you're on set and you have one idea in your mind and you're like kind of dead set on it, how open to like changing the ideas are you? Like, is that part of the process? Like, okay, maybe I was wrong about this. Let me like listen to other people's ideas. Let me try it a different way. Especially when it's an idea that has layers to it that involve skills that maybe I'm not the best person to speak on, you know, like, I mean, I hire DPs that I like to work with because they know better than me when it comes to where to put the camera and how to move the camera and how to expose the shot based on what I'm trying to get out of the whole bigger picture. So, or even if it's agency or client, you know, like they're going to know better on certain things than I am because they represent these brands that are paying for us all to have a job and do this thing. So, so you have to give and take. I mean, I'm not a sought after enough director to where I could just show up on set and just put my foot down on everything. I don't think anyone would want to work with me anymore. So, but yeah, I with what I have available to me on jobs, I try to make sure that there's people around me that I can lean on because I don't know what's best, especially when it comes to maybe camera or art department or, you know, what's best for this product we're selling, this car, this whatever. But the only things I do know are the message that we've all agreed that we're trying to put out in the world. So that's the one thing that I trust my gut on that piece of the process. And I'll have opinions on all the other pieces, but hopefully the people that are in place to help me on a project, I lean on them a lot heavier because they're experts in their thing. And I just am a guy with an opinion on their thing. So I try to take what they say very, very seriously. And so when you're making those early on projects, like different documentaries and things, like how did you kind of shape your perspective in terms of what you wanted to do and how you wanted to like tell these stories and build up to like where you're at today? Did you have like a plan or like a vision in your mind of like where you wanted to go? I mean, the early projects were not a ton of pre-production, you know, it's a lot of trial and error. I was initially more drawn to the camera side of things just because I was a still photographer. So naturally, like cinematography was the draw to start for me. Like I was a DP for years before I even considered directing something until I felt pulled to do that. So in the early projects, it was about visuals. It was about, you know, let me try to make the best visuals I can with the tools that I have. And make sure that those visuals are affecting the story or affecting the way I want people to feel. You know, if it's a documentary and I'm trying to tell a story about an athlete, which, you know, in the grand scheme is maybe not the most serious matter, but like I want people to feel something for this guy because maybe he went through a hardship before he started playing a sport professionally, or has a family scenario that's sensitive, and we're trying to make sure that we tell that story right. So for me, it was just the visuals. How can I use the camera to get the feeling that we were going for as a group? Because I was directing, I feel like a lot of those times, but I didn't really say I was directing because I was just so focused on the camera in the initial years of my career. So but now knowing how much those decisions influence the whole film, I definitely was directing more than I thought I was. But I mean, we were all so green, and so we're just learning. So, you know, you just
you get together with your buddies and you make a film, and you don't really put a lot of labels on it. You just do it because you like doing it.
So you're making like sports focused kind of films. Like what kind of like other genres were you looking at? Like were you looking at like NFL films or like those kind of like either or the ESPN 30 for 30 type vibes? Like what kind of, or where were these kind of films going to, and like who was paying for them and all that kind of stuff?
You know, at the time I would have been employed by this one sports team, but yeah, all those, you know, companies you mentioned, I mean, they do sports doc so well. So when we were making documentary, of course, those were inspirations. But there was a big boom around that time in the, you know, around like 2012, 2013 of like sports organizations, like getting the idea that they need to invest in talent, you know, to be a part of their organization, to tell those stories, whether they're just sport stories about this is what happened in this game at this time or whatever, which I was never really that interested in, or human stories about the people that are directly attached to the team or the fans around the team or anyone in the community that the team touches, you know, like those are the stories that I gravitated towards. So, but around that time, like, I think there was this, all of a sudden, this huge appetite for that type of material. So
what kind of like sport was it that you were doing?
it was ice hockey.
Oh, ice hockey. Okay, cool. Because yeah, you mentioned like your dad was heavily into sports and then you weren't really into sports and then you ended up doing the sports, but then you found out that I guess through doing it, it wasn't about like the game itself, it was about the humans behind it. Like you wanted to tell the human story.
Totally. Yeah. And I was interested in a lot of the sports as a kid, like my dad was. I just sucked at them way more than he did. So, so maybe that was part of it. Maybe if I had had one that I was good at, I'd have been like, yeah, stick this out. But you know, I was just there to have fun. And, I didn't really care too much about winning. So
yeah, because I think there's a lot of guys I've asked like, how did you get started? And a lot of them start off like skateboarding and they figure out they're not that great at it, so they pick up a camera and they're the camera guy, and then they kind of just like that's their role.
Skateboarders make great filmmakers. There's so many great filmmakers that came from skating. It's yeah, it almost makes me wish I had skated as a kid because I would have had a camera in my hands a lot earlier.
So you're working for an ice hockey team, I guess as in America, the North Carolina and whatever.
The Charlotte Checkers of the American Hockey League.
My dad's from Canada, so he's a big ice hockey fan. He likes Montreal Canadiens.
It's a great sport too, like for storytelling and for good characters. Like it was so great. Like I've worked, even now to this day, like I work with athlete and like race car driver talent all the time. And I do miss hockey sometimes because the characters in ice hockey that exist on each team are just hilarious. You've got these like, you know, you've got your Americans, and then you've got your really quirky, like fun Canadian personality on every team. And then you've got the European guys that bring a whole different flavor. Like it was always this international mix of characters. And there was never a shortage of comedy. There was never a shortage of great, interesting stories or people who were from really obscure parts of the world, or, yeah. So it was maybe a little easier than other sports, like as far as being able to find entertaining characters on your team.
Yeah, 'cause I guess the stereotype is the toothless, muscly guys, but they're probably very, you know, tough to go out in there and do that kind of sport. Like that's kind of the interest, is like finding out why people do what they do and how they're able to maintain like that level of, especially athletes. It's like, do you get tired? Do you get injured? Like, how do you keep going? And like, I guess that's the competitive nature. Like, why do you want to win so bad? Like, what is it about winning and putting that puck through the net? Like, why do you do that? So I guess that's a good, and it can be any sport really. Like you figure out how to tell the story. So when you were doing those little short documentary type sports centric content, how did you kind of decide, or how did you get to the next level of like maybe commercials? Like, do you remember the first time you shot a commercial, or the first time maybe you directed?
We got interested in doing commercials outside of hockey and sort of building away from that, because it, it just sort of felt like a one-way sort of street. And I liked it. I just knew that I wasn't going to be able to do what I wanted to do in that avenue of, filmmaking. So, so we broke out and started making commercials, with my producer, Eric, and just continued like that crash course in filmmaking of basically like small budget commercials. So we would do anything and everything from local, HVAC companies to more sports stuff. It didn't matter, because we just had to pay the bills and we didn't have a salary and health insurance anymore. So that was kind of the era of going freelance and like learning that, oh my God, I don't have any money and I have to survive. And, so it was scary, but it forced you to like, it made me just go like, well, this is what I want to do. And I'm not going to fail, to the sense of like, I'm going to feed myself. I'm going to pay my rent. So we did everything you can imagine. And, but we did find ourselves sort of like getting calls in the sports world, or, and NASCAR is so huge here in Charlotte, like 98% of the teams are based here. So our sport connection here in North Carolina sort of led us to people that worked in NASCAR, whether it was for teams or sponsors or drivers or whatever charitable organizations that are involved in NASCAR, anyone. So we sort of felt this shift of like, we were learning how to make commercials. I was learning how to shoot and how to direct and edit and do all these, still doing way too many of the pieces myself. But it opened doors. Like the team sports thing opened doors to people that could see similarities they're made this thing for an ice hockey team, but like, I work for a big NASCAR team and I want something similar, but geared more toward NASCAR. So, so that was the shift to like small commercials, on the automotive side. And then that was where like I got to, again, like kind of dip my toe in a new pond that came back to something that I did as a child, because that was one of, my best childhood memories is watching NASCAR. I grew up watching NASCAR with my dad, going to races. And so that world was always familiar. Like if you're from North Carolina, it doesn't necessarily mean you are a fan or you watch, but I happen to be. And I was always fascinated by cars and fascinated by, a lot of those types of things. And I just picked that up somewhere on my own, because my parents could have cared less about cars. But if NASCAR was on a Sunday, my dad was watching. It was on TV. So that as my career transitioned to freelance and I started shooting and directing a little more like on the commercial side of things, it just kind of naturally progressed toward the small budget side of the racing world.
So do you remember the first time you got into an armed car? Like, what was that experience like?
I somehow backed into arguably one of the most intense armed car situations my first time, just because I had an agency come to me and they wanted to make something for Daytona, for Toyota, and budget was small, but they basically wanted to take a chance on a director and a production company that they hadn't worked with before. And so I wrote a script, and the only things were, it was for Daytona, it was going to air during the Daytona 500, and it had to have the Supra in it. So this was in 2019 when I wrote this. The Supra was just coming out for 2020, and they brought back the Mark V Supra. So I wrote this film that took place at the track at Daytona, and didn't think they would make it. And they're like, "Yeah, this is great. Let's do it." So they greenlit the project, and I was like, "Oh, cool." And so I was shooting it, and I was co-directing it with my business partner, Eric. And so we had a day of like character scenes that we shot around the track, but then we had a full armed car day on the track, which if you're not familiar with Daytona, which I'm sure most of your viewers are, but it's a super speedway. It's got bankings that are like when you stand down on the apron looking up into the corners, it's like looking up at a 5-story building. It's massive, and they're banked so aggressively that you can't walk up them. You have to get on your hands and knees and crawl, and you could just fall right back down the hill onto the apron. So it's just this one of the most insane facilities I've ever been to for any sport, any motorsport, anything. So, and I was of course aware of all this because I grew up as a NASCAR fan, and so we got to hire a filmotechnic, and they came out, and I had this amazing crew, my stunt driver, my arm guy, the operator I was using. Everyone in that car was like the most seasoned, like they had just worked on a Marvel movie or something insane. So these guys were as seasoned as it gets, and I was as green as it gets. And so we get in the car before we start shooting, and I am so nervous, like so nervous. I'd never done anything like this. I was just like, what if this goes wrong, or what if I don't feel comfortable in the car, or what? I just had all these questions. So the stunt driver is a guy named Ely Barda. He's a big stunt performer in LA, does a lot of stuff, TV and movies. And he was our driver that day. And he's like, we need to do a couple recon laps just to make sure we know what speed we need to carry through the corners. And I was like, why? He's like, well, because if we go too slow, the car will tumble out of the corner down into the center of the track. So we just need to make sure we're going fast enough to keep enough centrifugal force to keep us from crashing into the apron. And I was like, yeah, we should definitely do that. Yeah. And so we took off on the pit road, and this is in, Porsche Cayenne turbo, and he put his foot down, and I'm just watching the speedometer, and we go past 100, and it goes past 110. And then, I'm in the back seat next to the first AC, and I just will never in my life forget that, going into turn 1 and just feeling my entire body just go. And being almost sideways, going through the corners, and we get to the back straight, and he goes, yeah, it looks like we need to hold about 85 to 90 in the corners. And I'm like, holy shit. So, I get out, I have a private moment with Eric, my producer, and I'm like, okay. And then I have to go make this film that I said I was going to make. So, it was a little bit of pressure, but I settled in, and it was one of the most fun experiences of my life. Like I mean, that car obviously is, I think, one of the most beautiful cars on the road. It's, I eventually bought one because I'm such a nut for that car. But I shooting that car at that track with the lighting the way we had it set, and with that super professional team like holding my hand because they knew I didn't know what I was doing. I had one of the best nights of my life. And I look back on that film now, and it's still a cool film, and I'm proud of a lot of it. And I know I screwed a ton of it up, and it feels dated at this point, but like just unbelievable experience. So yeah, my first arm car was in the bankings at Daytona, shooting a Toyota Supra at night. So it was a little hectic. Yeah, there's this there's a tradition where usually the truck race is on Friday, the Xfinity race is on Saturday, and the Cup race is on Sunday. But on like Thursday, they open the track, they let fans come in and hang out, walk through the infield, and just take in the experience that is Daytona. But they also have fresh painted the start finish line, and they let fans go out and they hand out Sharpies, and you can sign your name or a message to your favorite driver or a message to a family member or whatever. So they let the fans come in and sign the line. And it's just this long standing tradition that they've always done at Daytona. So I just had this idea of like, what if late night at the track, what if Kyle Busch breaks into the track driving a Supra, goes out, tears around the track, and then he signs the line with a burnout on top of the start finish line. And that's him signing the line in the most Kyle Busch fashion. So that was my little idea, and I tricked someone into giving us the money to make it. So
did you create like a treatment with like reference images, or like what kind of, was it an email, or did you get to talk to them in person? Like how did you do it?
That one, I honestly don't know for sure. I think I did do a treatment, but like it was early in my treatment making days just because I was still, like I knew what I wanted to make and I knew I had ideas that I wanted to get out in the world, but I still was so unpolished in like the process. So like when I see the amount of stuff that goes into getting a job off the ground now and getting to the first shoot day, the amount of things I have to do or my producers have to do, like that was a joke. I made a treatment, but like it was just so much smaller in scale. But yeah, so I would have done a treatment, and it's probably really bad. If I had it, I would probably laugh at some of the things I said. But like, I guess the words that were in there were enough to win the job because like I'm just kind of honest in mine. Like when an opportunity comes up to make something, if I resonate and I connect with it, or if it has a special place in my sort of, I'm really big on nostalgia. Like if it hits me there, I can write words that will explain that to people. And I guess maybe sometimes that resonates with clients or agencies or whoever you're pitching your ideas to. But there was a treatment somewhere in the world, and I don't know if it's any good, but it got me the job. So
was there like a brief, like they already had an idea to kind of create something and you kind of saw that and made it your own with, like, I guess it was your history of knowing about the sport and signing the line and all that? Or
a lot of my initial automotive and racing work was for an agency called Golan. It's a huge, IPG owned ad agency, but the team that I got embedded with that I guess put that trust in me, it was a really small team. They didn't have a lot of creatives. Like they were really good at like PR and social, and that was sort of their like specialty. So a lot of the times with them, I got to write a lot of my own projects, whether myself or my producer, Eric, is also a really talented writer. And I know, and I knew this isn't how the world works. Like I know, you have to learn to work with agency creatives. That's how the commercial world works. And I've got to experience that and I've got to work in that. But those initial projects were, my ideas or Eric's ideas or our shared ideas getting made. And so, it was, the process was very different. They would just come to me and say like, listen, we need a spot for that. We bought 2 minutes during a commercial break during the Daytona 500 and we want to fill it. And it needs to, be Toyota racing inspired. It needs to be vehicle marketing inspired. And we need to bring those things together. And the vehicle this year that they think will be the one they want to push is the new Supra. So I had a punch list of like Daytona, Supra, 2 minutes during the Daytona 500. And it was, which in hindsight is insane that any director would get that much leash to just go, oh, okay, I'll just come up with some ideas. Like it just doesn't happen that way very often. So I was incredibly lucky to be able to get my ideas in front of people. So so that project and a handful of Toyota projects that we did over the years following that one, our project that we did for Lexus that I directed, like those were all, I got to write most of them, and that's not how it normally works. So
you said you watched the Kit podcast, and one of his Toyota spots was like the whole pitch process. Like, what was that? Is that how it goes down with the Toyota people?
So they made 3 of those. I don't know which one's Kit direct. I know he directed the main one, the initial one, but anyone that makes commercials in the ad agency world for a living it hits a special spot in your heart when you see those. I mean, I know it's jokes and I know we're all having a laugh, and without the agencies that we work for and the collaborators that we have at the agencies, we wouldn't have a job. But it's a funny one for sure. So it happens a lot. It is, but I will say it's few and far between. The people in those roles that ask those silly questions, like, doesn't happen that often, but when it does, you're like, oh my god, like the whole like, hey, we want to make sure, like, I think, what did he reference? Like, we want to make sure it looks like the driver is female in the car in this scene. Oh, okay, cool, definitely, we can do that. but they need to be wearing a helmet. Okay. You know, like when he's told that story, I was just like, that is the perfect example of, you know, but it's our job to figure it out, right? That's why they hire filmmakers. It's like, yeah, needs to be female and they have to wear a helmet, figure it out. So
that's the job. So, and then I'm just looking on your Vimeo, like there's a Toyota Tundra Mission Impossible. Was that like the next year or was that the same time frame as the other Supra one?
Or two after the first one, we did that one. Like I wrote that one. I did one called Horsepower Hangover where with some of their NHRA drivers for the new Toyota Tundra, they were like, we just want to have a film where they drag race the new Tundras against the old Tundra and show that the V6s are faster than the V8. That was the idea. So they're like, but it's going to be released around the Vegas NHRA race. So it'd be cool if it was Vegas themed. So, just those were the constraints. And then I just had to come up with something. So that was, yeah, I guess that would have been 2020, 2021, and 2022 where I did a lot of that, Toyota work.
And then there's like the Sponsafier IT help. Sponsafier, was that like a comedy type?
Yeah, that was my first like proper campaign I had ever done. That's an old idea from the early 2000s. So there's like in the world of NASCAR, there's fans get really connected to commercials because there's been so much good stuff over the years in NASCAR. There's just like comedy and action and you know, using the personalities of the drivers. And it's always been something that NASCAR has done really, really well, or, you know, their brands in the sport or the ad agencies in the sport. But they've always given a lot of leash to the creatives to come up with fun and interesting and funny advertising in that world. So Sponsafier was a campaign that was done for Toyota back in the early 2000s, mid 2000s maybe. And it was so successful that a couple years ago, they were like, let's bring it back. Let's do new ideas, but in that same vein, the vein of, you know, fans get to design the cars. So if any Joe off the street were to design a cup car that was self-serving, what would he do? So I got to write these ideas of just these fans that, you know, this woman wants to make contact with aliens, and she thinks the best way that she can communicate to them that they need to come visit Earth is on Kyle Busch's cup car. So it started with that. And then I was like, but then what if, you know, Kyle's brother, Kurt Busch, very successful NASCAR driver as well, Toyota driver. What if, as Kyle reluctantly tells the world that he's going to be racing in this aliens car, what if his brother just casually tells him that he's been abducted? And so that was just sort of where it spawned from. And then, so we made 3 Sponsafiers, but, you know, the aliens one, I think, was the one that got the most airtime throughout the season. But yeah, got to abduct Kurt Busch into an alien spaceship. And then on the racing side of things too, that one was really special because I don't know for sure, but that was shot at North Wilkesboro Speedway, which is an iconic old rundown NASCAR track here in North Carolina that they recently brought back last year for the All-Star race. And they invested tens of millions of dollars into fixing it up and making it usable again. And I think we were the first actual cup car on that track in like 25 years for that commercial. So I got to do arm car work on the track at North Wilkesboro. There's no running water. There's no toilets. There's no electricity. So we had to bring all that stuff in. We had to light the track for a night exterior with condors and 18Ks. And it was just a super surreal experience because I had watched that track as a kid. I had watched races on TV with my dad. And yeah, it was a super special moment to be there making a big commercial to be aired on NASCAR.
I guess it's kind of like the Super Bowl of, like, they have all the commercials that people like to spend all their money on.
Is truly the advertising Super Bowl of motorsports. Like you just get, everyone rolls out their big stuff for the 500 every year, and you get to see a ton of great work. And now, like the new funny thing these last couple of years has been like it's not the jobs that I win, it's the jobs that I lose, where I'm always like, oh man, that whatever spot that I pitched on that I didn't win, like I want to see it so bad when it comes out, because and then when it comes out and it's great, you're like, okay, good. Like maybe I didn't deserve that one or whatever.
Yeah, it must be difficult to invest like a lot of effort into something and you lose it. Like, how do you keep your like I guess motivation, or like in terms of like didn't get that job, but maybe the next one or next one. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of defeat. Like, you just got to keep going.
I'm still learning. Like I'm still new enough in this world that I haven't figured that out yet. And I, one of your other guests, Mark Jenkinson sent me a DM on Instagram that meant a lot, and a handful of directors did, because I hit a cold streak, like a really bad cold streak this year, where I couldn't win anything to save my life. And so you just, it's tough. You start going like, well, maybe my ideas suck, or maybe I'm not likable, or you just start making things up in your head, and it's really, really frustrating. And obviously that's on top of all those feelings, that's your livelihood. So you go months without having a job, and you're like, geez, like, like it starts getting worrying on a lot of different levels. So a commercial I had made for Lexus got nominated at the Motor Film Awards for this year. And so, that was like, after a bunch of, losses, it was something that felt like a win, even though it was a job that I shot and made and was out in the world. I was like, man, like this has been a really tough year for winning jobs. And, but this is a reminder, of why we do what we do. And I tagged Mark, and I tagged a couple other directors that I was nominated against for best commercial, and their spots are like just stupid how good they are. Like Mark's 75th NASCAR spot is just so amazing in so many different ways. But I was just so happy to be included in the conversation that I tagged a couple guys, and I wrote a little post about how it's been tough, but this feels like a reminder to like keep my head down and keep going. And he messaged me, and he was just like, that never goes away, ever. And so my initial reaction to that was, holy shit. But then I thought about it, and he basically said, like, it never goes away, but you find ways for it to get easier. But I'm still chasing that, way to not be brought down when I lose a job. So then I'm sitting here going like, this guy loses jobs still, like he's the king of motorsport and automotive, filmmaking. So, but anyway, yeah, I don't have the answer yet as to how to handle that, because I'm still learning how to do it. And it's tough and it's heartbreaking, but, it makes you a better director. It makes you better at pitching. It makes you better at writing. And yeah, I have a folder on my computer that I keep that's just full of treatments and ideas and stuff that I lost that will never get made, or who knows if those ideas will resurface in the future. But I look through it every once in a while, and sometimes it makes me feel a lot better, and sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, I don't know. When someone you have on this show has the answer of how to deal with that and put in, weeks and weeks of work for $0 and no payoff over and over and over, if someone gives you an answer on how to do that, please tell me, because if I don't know it, and if Mark Jenkinson doesn't know it, then I don't know if it exists. So
yeah, I'll keep asking.
Yeah,
but
thank you.
It's the same with like music videos, and like people put in all this time and effort, and then even sometimes the ideas will get stolen. Like, there's no safeguard, there's no like rules in place. There are some people trying to like regulate it a bit by, at least if you pitch, you get paid, $1,000 or something just to cover your time. But yeah, it's just like you're volunteering and giving up all your ideas, and there's no like way to kind of safeguard them. Like you can't really copyright them and say this is copyrighted because yeah, you watch those Super Bowl ads and or the NASCAR Daytona ads and you see, oh, wasn't that my idea? Like how do you kind of keep those in mind? So yeah.
Fortunately, I've never had that happen. That would sting.
Yeah.
If you saw your ideas on TV and you didn't make the spot.
But yeah, it's difficult to be a creative, and yeah, everyone has their own way of dealing with, I guess, rejection. But how often like do you do like a pitch? Like how often do you get the briefs in and you have to create a pitch? And sometimes do you just look at it and be like, this isn't worth my time? Or do you just do every one that comes in the door?
I don't know. I've kind of cut myself out in a world where I don't get tons and tons of them because I'm not doing the type of projects that are like reoccurring or like that happening that often, which is cool and not cool at the same time, I guess. But no, I haven't had a lot of crap come across my desk, which is very fortunate. But it fluctuates heavily. I'll have a span of 6 months where, I might be pitching 3-4 times, which, in my world, that's a lot, like at least at my level. Like I'm sure bigger directors are seeing way more than that. But for where I'm at in my career and the creative and budgets that I get trusted with from the agencies that trust me or the brands that trust me, it varies so much. I'll get 3 or 4 in a handful of months, and then I won't get any for 3 or 4 months. So it's that same roller coaster of losing, pitches and losing treatments and stuff. So there's no formula. I mean, if I could do one a month, like, and have that consistency, clock in, clock out, maybe I would like that sometimes. But it's usually and they never come spread out. They all come at one time. So like I'll get one and I'll be like, oh my God, okay, I got to dig in and I got to do my research and I got to, take these agency calls and ask all the right questions. And then another one will drop in and I'm like, holy shit, am I going to be able to do this? So, it's always all at one time and then it's crickets for a couple months and it's never spread out in a way that's manageable.
That sounds hard to deal with, I guess, because there's different deadlines and things like in terms of like, the Super Bowl or whatever, like the NASCAR, there's an event coming up, they need an ad for it. It's probably hard to kind of predict those things. But in terms of like other ways to spend your time or make money, do you have like different ideas of like, I know some DPs will buy a camera and like rent it out when they're not working, or like, I don't know if the directors have the same kind of freedom, like buy a cafe or like invest in a t-shirt company or something. Like, how do you kind of spend your time when you're not directing? Like, is there ways to kind of make money on the side?
There are. I just don't know many of them.
Yeah.
No, I do on the side from time to time when I have people that will trust me. I do color grades on the side, especially like in slow times. Like I'm just not a big enough director to just be stacked with work all 12 months of the year. I would love to have a full calendar. I would love to be doing a commercial a month, but it's just not realistic. So I actually years ago just really fell in love with the color grading process, and I've had a couple like mentors that have passed work to me, and so I will do color grades from time to time when they make sense with my schedule, and that's just been a way I've sort of, that's my like back alley money that I can make on the side is through some color grades. So
what program are you coloring with, like DaVinci Resolve? Or?
to Resolve, yeah.
It seems to be the go-to.
Yeah, it's great. I've done a couple edits this year in Resolve just because Adobe Premiere always hates me, so I've gone to the dark side. But I try not to edit too much because when you start working with good editors, you realize how much you suck. So
after you did those first couple of Toyota spots at the racetrack, and then you did the Sponsafier series, and then what's the NHRA Go Home official trailer? Is that something?
That is a feature documentary. Yeah. So Go or Go Home is it's sort of like it's a feature length doc, but it's kind of a proof of concept that is basically it's about NHRA. If you're not familiar, it's the National Hot Rod Association. It's like the Top Fuel and funny car dragsters that you'll see on TV on Sundays on Fox. It's just great, super fun, super exciting form of racing with this amazing cast of characters that exist in it. And a friend and collaborator asked me if I would ever have any interest in producing a documentary about a sport that she felt and that we felt was a little underrepresented in the world of, the Formula One Drive to Survive and all these huge mega sports docs that are being made by, box to box films and all these massive companies. And she asked if I had any interest in making this doc, and I was like, yeah, absolutely, because I had done my Toyota film, Horsepower Hangover. I got to meet two funny car and two Top Fuel drag racers from NHRA, and they were just some of the best, most down to earth, most fun, laid back, professional athlete talent that I had ever worked with in a commercial sense. So I was like, if there's more people like this and they have these interesting stories, like, I'm all in. So she raised enough money for us to make a proof of concept, basically one feature length doc. And I spent probably the majority of my summer in 2022 just going to racetracks and chasing these stories down. And right now, all that's public is just a trailer, because we're shopping. We have a team that's been kind of piecemealed together that's trying to help us shop it to streamers, the big, huge ones, and then everything in between. And so it's still sort of in that selling process, which I'm not really versed on. I don't know a lot about it. I just make the thing. That's what I always joke about. It's like, I don't know what to do with it, but I'll make the thing. So, but yeah, it was such an amazing process. I love documentary work. I came from all that documentary work that I did when I worked in team sports. So it felt familiar in ways, but it was nice to do it at a proper scale with a good crew. And, yeah, it was hard, man. Documentary work is tough. It's emotionally draining, but it's also at times way more fulfilling than commercials can be. Because you get to know your characters, you get invested in your characters, their successes, their failures. And then I kept finding myself like just being drawn to certain characters because of little details I would notice. There's a lot of family stories, and there's a lot of, heartbreak, and there's all these things wrapped up in documentary and sports. And I found myself getting like emotionally affected by these stories just because I was so ingrained in them. So the process was addicting for that reason. It felt like I was in it with them. So it was really, really fun to make. I would do more sports doc in a heartbeat. Who knows if someone buys this idea and I don't get booted off the job, like, I would love to do some more episodes of it. But yeah, that was my foray into motorsports documentary. So my trial by fire, basically.
Yeah, I think, especially comparing commercials to documentaries, you get a lot more time to spend on the character development. Like, even like feature films, you kind of only have like 2 hours to kind of set up a character, whereas something like Breaking Bad, you have like 6 or 7, however many hours of footage that you can kind of go anywhere. And so that's kind of and then the documentaries, finding those interesting characters. Like, when I was talking to the Unrivaled Films guy, John, he was mentioning like a lot of the documentary projects were for like, the day before a NASCAR race, like a big event, like kind of like the Super Bowl of like different races. So it's like, I never really thought of that before. Like, okay, yeah, like there is like when you're going to sell it, like to Fox Sports or ESPN or whatever, like network, Netflix, like look, we're going to release this film on this date because there's a big event coming up and it's going to fit in with your schedule, and a lot more people, a lot more eyeballs are going to be on it. So that's why it's kind of like, oh yeah, like, you know, think about the sales process as well in terms of who's going to watch it and why they're going to watch it, and it'll help you kind of sell the film a bit more. But yeah.
On, but the guy that's trying to help sell the project, you know, he's sold docs to HBO and Hulu and all that sort of stuff. But the way he talks about sports documentary, because he's also a director, was super inspiring, because he said to me, he was like, whether you watch sports or not, like he was like, you know, we're drawn to this as human beings, not because it's just competition, but we know deep down that like these men and women that we're watching do whatever their thing is, we know that there are 20 different individuals with 20 different stories participating. You know, what, like if you use NHRA or NASCAR or Formula One, Drive to Survive. Why is Drive to Survive successful? Because you got 20 guys with 20 different stories, and some of them are more interesting than others, but you want to know more about that guy or that girl because, you know, the filmmakers were given that access. So his whole take on it is that's why sports doc is so amazing, is because we've got the drama that already exists in sports as that sort of outer layer of all these great human stories that exist inside of it. So when he explained it to me, I was just like, okay, this guy gets it. So hopefully, I don't know, hopefully the doc is either public soon, or hopefully we're making episodes of it. I have no idea what's going to happen, but yeah.
Yeah, like sometimes it's not even about like the sport, like people aren't even interested in like the cars or the racing. It's like, I want to know the drama behind the scenes. I want to know why this guy's like he is, or how he got there. Yeah.
Days of doing little tiny no budget documentaries for this hockey team, and it's like, you know, my producer Eric, he discovered at one point that one of the ice hockey goalies was terrified of diving headfirst into a swimming pool. And he was like, well, but man, you play ice hockey and you're a goalie. You sit there with some pads on and a helmet, and the guys shoot this puck at you at 100 miles an hour and it hits you in the face all the time. You're not afraid of that, but you won't dive. He's like, yeah, I just have this thing. I don't like that. So we made a little short documentary about him learning to dive as a grown man. He was 30 years old, you know, and like that is the stuff that excites me. It's those little details, those little human stories and moments that, like, yeah, the guy, you know, sure, we could talk about how many pucks, how many shots he saved, and how many games he had shutouts in or whatever. But like, that's secondary. Like the fact that those little, even if it's something funny or interesting like that, or if one of my drag racers has a really special connection with his father, and that means so much to him, and how they celebrate their successes and then deal with their failures together, or how one of my drivers in my film had is driving a car that belonged to his team owner's son, who passed behind the wheel of that car in an accident, and how he has to go out there every single race, every weekend, with that man's name written on the side and honor that family that puts him behind the wheel of that car. Like, those are the stories in sports and motorsports documentary that draw me, and I hopefully a lot of other people in.
Yeah, like there's some great stories to be told, and that's why it's like, yeah, you have to just get the right like investor or the right platform, and just like
it's just the access. I think there's a lot of really good filmmakers out there that love, you know, football or baseball or what, it doesn't matter, like, that love that stuff, but it's just the access is the hard part. Like, raising money for us to make that documentary maybe wasn't the hardest part. Getting the access and getting the trust of NHRA or sponsors or whatever it was, whoever had to grant us that access, that's tough, because they don't know you, they don't owe you anything, they don't trust you. So I think if the access weren't so protected, I think we would see even more really good storytelling. But, you know, I get it. They can't let any any guy or girl with a camera just go running around, you know, with the NFL team here in town. Like, it's not that easy, but it could make for some good stories if they would open that world a little bit. So,
and it's even just like trying to do like a podcast like this. It's like trying to get the trust of the filmmakers or the people, the guests involved. And like, I think like having, you know, Mark Jenkinson on early on, like the second episode, like people are able to see that and say, okay, he's actually doing it. He's not just pretending. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of people that ask to do certain things and you don't really know if they've done it before. So yeah, a lot of the times it's like, okay, what have you done before? So if they can see your website or see, oh, okay, he's already done a Toyota commercial. Like, let's hire him to do our commercial. So it's always like, that's the thing with like proof of concept or like, what do you call it? Spec commercials. Like people, yeah. Did you ever do any spec commercials or anything like that?
Sort of. Like I have there's a project on my Vimeo that, you know, it was just something that I wrote and I really wanted to make it. And I went to the agency that I had been working with for Toyota and I pitched it and they were like, this is great. We don't have any money because it wasn't plan, you know, it wasn't in the plan. It's called, the film is called Born of the Earth. And so they scrounged up like a little bit of money, but it was like not even close to, you know, 10-20% of what it would cost to make it. But, you know, so I guess it's sort of spec. It's not like 100% spec, but I just liked the idea and I wanted to get it made. And they liked it enough that they were like, we'll buy airtime it was made for the first time that NASCAR raced on dirt at Bristol Motor Speedway. So yeah, I mean, I don't go out and execute a lot of spec on my own. I have in the past for like smaller things like years ago, but with automotive, it's tough. Cause like, that's why I was telling you, like, if you know some guy with a Bugatti that'll let me, you know, use it in a spec spot, I'll write a spec spot. But now in automotive, there's a lot of restrictions. So you have to be connected or have, you know, a lot of hookups. And I don't know. I also am really bad at asking for favors. So I think, you know, if I was braver on like all my collaborators, my DPs, my arm car guys, whoever, going to them being like, hey, can I call in a favor? Like, makes me, I don't know. I'm just not good at that. So some guys are great at it and they get all the favors in the world. They make some great films, but I'm just too scared.
It's good to try and pay people, especially if they've got other jobs on and they might lose a job because they're on your free commercial. So
exactly. So yeah, so even that tiny job, people got paid. Like, I mean, everyone outside of myself and the production company got paid. So you know, little favors on gear and stuff probably, but it did have a tiny budget behind it. So hopefully it doesn't feel like it did, but yeah, that was a fun one. I've always wanted to drive a cup car through the woods, so we did it.
That looks great. And then what about the Toyota Countless? What was the story behind that one?
Yeah, Countless was the basically the spot that they were going to do for the season, for the entire 2022 season. So it was going to come out at Daytona and it was going to run all the way to the championship race in November. And again, that was another situation of just them like, we need something for this year to run during NASCAR. And that was sort of it. They were kind of celebrating some milestones around that time with like number of wins or championships or whatever that they had amassed. And so I wrote something and it snowed the night before we drove some of those cars on that racetrack. That was shot at Charlotte Motor Speedway on the Roval, like road course, and then on the oval as well. It snowed the night before and there was ice in some of the corners. So we had to like shoot around. Like if you look at really, really little select moments in the driving footage, you'll see like snow piled up or ice in areas. And so, yeah, but my stunt driver who was driving the NASCAR Cup car, we would shoot him from we would pick him up at the end of the back stretch, go through turns 3 and 4 down the front stretch, but then turns 1 and 2 had been in the shade all day. So they were completely iced over. And while Charlotte isn't as aggressive as Daytona, it still has very heavily banked corners. So then he'd have to drive down on the apron, go around a bunch of ice, and then back on the track. So that was, I think that project was written, prepped, and shot, and then delivered in like 2 weeks or something insane, especially for a small budget commercial like that, because the budget of that is not what it could have been for what it was. So yeah, we shot that over the span of 2 or 3 days here in Charlotte. And yeah, I just, always looking for opportunities to shoot Supras and race cars on track and things like that. So and it poured rain one of the days. Like there's one of the drivers in it, his name's Martin Truex Jr., the guy with the beard. All his dialogue scene and all his in-car stuff, it is just like pouring rain, just chucking it down is my favorite new saying I stole in the UK when I was just there. So, but we just did what we could and made a national broadcast spot for not a lot, but it was one of the most fun experiences in my career just because it was so challenging. But at that point I had trust, like I had agency trust, I had some client trust, and they let me do the thing I wanted to do. And I'm super grateful for that. So, and I think it's translated into, what I've done since then. I think that's been my favorite part of it. Is it, when you do what I do and you're trying to fight your way into this world, like you'll take any opportunity to try to show anyone like what you're capable of, but that you're trustworthy and that you'll deliver. And because that's the hardest part. Like coming up with ideas is one thing, but being able to come through on it is tough, and it's stressful and it's overwhelming. But that was one opportunity where I was like, okay, I've earned this trust, and I think I delivered on it. I don't know. I mean, that's up to whoever watches it, but really, really fun project. Great people involved too. I couldn't have made that without my little core team that I had on that. That would have been impossible.
Yeah, because I think, like you said, coming up with an idea is one thing, but then making it happen is another, in terms of like fitting it in the budget. Like just one location could just blow out the entire budget. One like camera car or like camera move that you want to do, or an explosion or something. It's like, we can't do that. It's like you have to have an experience with it and know what things cost. Kind of like building a house. If you think, oh, I'm going to build this house for X amount, but then a curveball gets thrown in and they find out the foundation's cracked and that's going to cost $50,000 to fix. It's like, oh boy, it's the same kind of thing. But I guess you did a series of commercials at like those same kind of racetracks. So you had an idea of like the costs involved and the different crew that you would need, and I guess the post-production. So you kind of, when you're writing these like treatments, you kind of have in mind the budget, what it's going to cost. Like, do you work on the budget, or do you have like the producer help you out with like what things cost?
Depends on the job. I mean, as you're coming up on smaller commercials in this world, like I am way more involved in that because of how close I work with my production company and my producers. And then the bigger jobs, it's much more separated. It's like the one I just wrapped, I didn't touch any of the money or the producing or whatever. But on smaller jobs, as you're coming up, like a lot of directors like me who either have no production company, or they're not repped, or they own their own, or whatever everyone's situation is, you just get naturally thrown into the producing process. So it helps because you get that little baseline of like, okay, if I want arm car, it's going to cost this much per day. If I want, a really great key grip or Technocrane or drone or whatever, doesn't matter. you get those like baseline things, you understand what stuff costs. So fortunately I have that baseline, but like as time goes on and maybe jobs get bigger or maybe they pivot heavily creatively, you always mess something up. Like every treatment, I'll be like, oh yeah, you know, we're going to do this. And then I want to shoot here and do this with the camera, whatever. It doesn't matter what the idea is. And you sell those ideas to the agency or the client or whoever, and they go, yeah, great, let's do that. And maybe you win the job. And then later you find out the thing you just pitched is like, you know, 5 times as expensive as you maybe thought it was, just from your own inexperience. So I haven't been around long enough to know every detail of everything. And so that's where like your producers can come in and whether it's gear or like, you know, things you need to get a certain shot or whatever, or even if it's time. I feel like time is the biggest thing that you have to learn as a director to like, you know, you'll be told what the budget is. And while you're not controlling it and you're not moving the money around, like it's good to have a sense of like, all right, if someone's going to give me $100 grand, 500 grand, $1 million, whatever, being able to scale time and know, all right, at this budget with this creative, realistically, we can shoot 3 days. Like at least having that in my experience has been so important, because time is the thing that I think will take all the time you give us. Like as directors, like if you'll give me 5 days to shoot something, I'm going to take those 5 days because I want to nail these shots or I want to get everything perfect. But that's rarely the case. You know, usually you get handed a bunch of scripts and you treat on them and they go, cool, we're going to do this in 3 days. And you're like, oh my God. So making sure that you pitch in your treatment realistically. I get preached to by my producers all the time that it's like, yeah, I know you want things to be perfect and I know you want, you know, things to be a certain way or certain times a day or locations, but remember, we have 3 days. So I get that kind of beat into my head a lot, but it's such a good instinct to have, because again, it just goes back to being able to deliver. Like if you sell a bunch of ideas that can't be done in the time frame that you're being given, or the money that you're being given that pays for those days, like then maybe you can't deliver for your agency, your client, whoever's hiring you. So yeah, I'm less and less involved in the budgets as time goes on, but I at least try to be conscious of time, because that, you know, each shoot day, you know, and then you know, overtime, obviously making sure you pack your days out to where they're able to accomplish it in the time you need to accomplish it, because every 30 minutes, you know, and you start feeling producers hovering around you, and your AD's like kind of shrugging because you're out of time, but it's not a nice feeling. So
I think you mentioned it earlier, like the Toyota horsepower Hangover, but that one looks like a lot of locations, a lot of different shoots. It's like 3.5 minutes long. Like, what was the story behind that? Like, how did you kind of get all those ideas and onto the?
Yeah, so that was just an idea that was, you know, a man wakes up in Vegas and he can't remember the night before because he was so blown away by the horsepower of this new Tundra he had driven. So, and the main driver in that is he's an NHRA driver. His name's Antron Brown. He's one of the most friendly, kind-hearted, but also wildly funny and entertaining, you know, athletes or drivers I've ever worked with. So that was kind of a gift to have such a great personality. But yeah, that was shot in 3 days in Las Vegas, at the drag strip at Las Vegas. We shot at the Bellagio, for all like the hotel and, you know, those scenes. And again, that was just like another opportunity to, you know, the truck was the purpose. The end goal was to show those new trucks off, but like in an entertaining way. And again, like I feel like this is a common theme with my stuff, but I get hired to make like 60, 90, 2-minute long, whether it's commercial or a short film or whatever it might be, branded content type stuff. And then there's always like a 30 cut down later on. So that did get made into a 30 to air during NHRA in 2022. So yeah, that was, I love Las Vegas. I just think it's such a visually interesting place, whether it's the desert, or the Strip, or, you know, whether it's man-made or natural, it's a beautiful place to point a camera at. So yeah, crazy fun project. And another idea that I never thought would get made. And they were like, yeah, let's do this. And so like, I think I watched your episode with Kit, and he even said it, like, about his film, The Pitch. He's like, they're gonna make this? Like, yeah, they want to make it. And, you know, kudos to brands of that scale that have the guts to make fun of themselves in a film, or, you know, insinuate that a man is intoxicated off of horsepower. Granted, there's no mention of drugs or alcohol, but like, I wrote that and I was like, there's no way this gets made. No way. And they were like, yeah, let's do it. So I love a client that's down to do something unexpected.
Right. And then what about the Lexus Obsession Begins with F? That's the one you got nominated for the Motor Awards. Is that right?
Nominated for Best Commercial, and I believe it was also nominated for Best Sound and Sound Design, which De Facto Sound did for us on that particular spot. And yeah, that was to date, that was like probably the biggest commercial I had done at that time. And so like the learning process, like the amount of lessons learned on that one was just massive. You know, what to do, what not to do. Time, we shot that in 2 days. It was 1 day at Road Atlanta, which is an insanely awesome racetrack in Atlanta, Georgia. And then 1 day on different locations around Charlotte, North Carolina. But yeah, I don't know. That one felt good, because when we got nominated for that, like, I'm pretty confident it was the smallest budget nomination in the category this year. But I mean, I put everything, like, I didn't get paid a penny on that. I put everything into it. And so did my producers at Whatnot. There was a conscious decision, like, let's just take the biggest swing we can and let's put everything we have. So I don't even think there was much of a profit, because, you know, it's a new brand, a new relationship, a new opportunity. Like, I guess sometimes, you know, maybe that's my spec work, right? Is just taking a project with a budget and being like, well, I really want to do this. Like, well, you can't, because that costs this much. Like, what if I donate my rate? And so it was one of those situations. So I'm sure people will watch it and be like, this guy is so dumb. But you know, I can't afford to do that hardly ever, but on that project it felt appropriate. So I guess that one holds a special place, just because it was a really conscious group effort between myself and my producers at Whatnot to make the best thing we can with every ounce of resources that we had. So I don't know, it's a fun job. And road course work in arm car is a totally different animal. I've done a lot of like straight lines and a lot of oval tracks, but I've shot at VIR and I've shot at Road Atlanta, and it's definitely a physically taxing experience going around a road course, staring at a monitor this big in front of you while you're feeling your body getting thrown through corners. And so I always feel bad for the first ACs, because they have to ride in the trunk of the Porsche. And I have made a very, not proud of this, but I have seen some first ACs get a little car sick, because I can't be fun back there. Those guys are tough.
Yeah, you got to get the mayonnaise commercials and stuff, I guess.
Exactly. I wish, I always wanted to do one just so I could use the line on set, because I'm sure maybe not everyone knows, but it's commonplace that you're shooting on location or in public, and, you know, the guy walking down the street stops and is like, "Oh, what are y'all shooting?" You always say a mayonnaise commercial. I remember one of my first ever times on a film set watching one of my crew say that, and I was like, why the hell did he say that? And someone was like, that's what you always say. And I was like, oh, okay. So to be shooting a mayonnaise commercial and drop that line would just be like so good. Can't wait. I'm probably not going to get a mayonnaise commercial ever, but a boy can dream.
Yeah. So do you have any hopes for the future? Like, is there anything that you wanted to achieve?
Oh man. Yeah. I mean, professionally, I want to make, I just want to make stuff that gets a reaction, you know, whether I always say, like, I go back to this word a lot, but like nostalgic, you know, I'm a real nostalgic person. I get fixated on like moments in my life or like feelings in my life or you know, just experiences or anything that had an impact on me. And I sort of store those in my head. And so that's like the one really fun thing about being able to bring those ideas to even to commercial work, because if you can make those moments in commercial work, you can make those with these things that are being sold. Like, it's not lost on me that we're selling stuff, right? But like when I see these opportunities to tell stories around this stuff we might be selling, like that's going to affect people, you know, like maybe they had a friend or a parent or someone that they experienced earlier in their life that a moment or a feeling was built around a car. I think about that all the time. Like, I have my own, everyone who's into cars has their own. So when I look at the world I get to play in, like, I see that opportunity and I look for it and I chase it. I just wrapped another, you know, NASCAR related project that'll come out next year. And every little moment was about experiencing it for the first time. It's a lot of characters, a lot of actors experiencing certain racing moments for the first time. And like, that just spoke right to me, because I relive moments from my life that were, that I keep and I pull from in my work because of those feelings. So I think my going forward, I would like to keep trying to continue to do that. And it's not always possible, but I at least try to make sure that my work is, has a dose of that, or has the ability to maybe give that to someone else, because it definitely, I got it from the project. Like, my stuff's never going to be the craziest driving footage and sound design and camera movement. Like, there's so many, you know, guys and girls out there that do that way better than I do. And if you want that, like, there's so many great people for that. But I just hope that my work in the automotive space, maybe, you know, I hope you can feel the things that I'm pulling from in my work. And I hope it also, you know, someone might watch that and go like, oh man, like, that car was special to me, or that moment these characters just went through, had a moment like that. So I think that's my ultimate goal, and continuing to have the privilege to work making car spots, like, and car films. Like, I can't take all the credit for this, but I try to remember on set, because I'll have, you know, DPs I work with or producers or people will come to me, and I'll go to people and be like, look what we're doing right now. Like, look what we're doing. You know, we're filming race cars on a track, or we're filming actors, you know, doing a thing around cars. Like, this is just, it blows my mind on a regular basis. So I also hope that I can keep going to work, and if people will have me, and I can also just stop, you know, right before I, you know, hop in an arm car or go behind a monitor, and just be like, look what we're doing. Like, look what we're all doing right now. This is crazy. So I think if I could keep working and have those feelings, whether for myself or for the people that watch the things I make, that would be ideal.
Sweet. Yeah, keep the passion alive, I guess. Like, it's nothing worse than having a grumpy old director being angry at, like, yelling at people.
I get yelled at a lot by like ADs or like producers and stuff, where it's like, I just, when you come from the world I come from, when it's like one man band, small production, small commercial, you know, documentary, whatever, wherever you learn to make films, I just still have this thing in my head where it's like, when we're in the last couple of minutes and we've got to go, we've got to roll because the sun's setting or something, like, I jumped over a fence on my last set, and it like blew some people's mind. Like my AD was like, "Oh my God, the director is jumping over." I was like, there was some stuff behind the fence that was in the shot, and I was the closest person to it. And it's either we call a PA to do it, or I jump the damn fence and I throw the Coke bottle away or whatever that was in the shot. And like, that's always a funny one too, is like when you come from the world I came from, you just would rather do certain things yourself and just get them done. And I know that's like a control freak trait that I would need to work on. But yeah, I was jumping fences on my last job and I was getting yelled at for it because I'm not supposed to. So
yeah, not afraid to get your hands dirty, I guess.
Or just too dumb to ask someone else to help out. I don't know. It's one or the other.
So as like a closing thought, like, do you have any advice for other filmmakers who want to get into directing commercials or automotive work in particular?
Yeah. I mean, as far as like getting in, I would just say like there's so much value in just saying yes to maybe stuff that doesn't sound that exciting, or maybe the project's not that sexy, or maybe the creative sucks or whatever. Because like if you show up and you do the job and you're friendly and you are enthusiastic and you have a good time and you make some good work, you know, maybe it's serving a client you don't care about or a whatever, and it maybe doesn't pay well, maybe it's all the bad things, but there's going to be that one guy or girl on that set, whether it's at an agency or with a client or whatever, a race team, a car manufacturer, it doesn't matter. There's going to be that one guy or girl there that's at some junior position. Maybe at their next job, they bump up to here and they're at an agency or a brand, and they go, "Man, I did that job and I have this other job coming up. You remember that guy, Rory? Like, he was great to work with. He had a good attitude. He made great work. He did it under budget, like whatever it takes." Like, that would be my biggest advice, is just to remember that those people are on every set you go on, and those impressions you make could have a lasting value, you know, like because that literally happened to me. Like a guy I worked with on a small race team commercial that was just blah, just thought when he got a different job years later, like, "Hey, I should call that guy and see if he wants to direct this thing." And it was a huge moment, huge turning point in my career. So maybe go, yeah. Cause right now I think with Instagram being what it is, like everyone thinks like, oh, if you're not out filming exotic cars, or if you're not at like the coolest racetracks, or you're not like, I think we get wrapped up in like in that a little bit, especially at the lower levels. Like if you're coming up, but take those jobs that aren't the coolest ones, you know, and go in and conduct yourself and do work like you were on the set of the thing you really want to be doing right now. Because people will take notice of that, and hopefully they'll remember. And then when the day comes and they have to go back through the old bank and say like, who is a good filmmaker that could do this that I liked being around, they might go like, oh, you know what? Rory or Ben or whoever, these guys did it, and I'm going to call them. So that was what I'd say for getting in. In general, I would say, I think this was instilled in me a long time ago. It was just like developing your taste is more important than developing how good of a cinematographer you are, or how good of a editor you might be, or whatever your thing is. If you're director, DP, editor, colorist, doesn't matter. Like, because if you do the job, you can figure out how to do it right. Like the best DPs are using the same cameras and the same lights as most DPs, but their taste is so good. And this isn't anything new. I've heard so many way more eloquent, way more talented people say it, but it's true. Like if you have the taste to know the difference between what's really good and what's maybe not as good, you'll find out how to make the better of the two. So So yeah, watching the right things, paying attention to the right things, absorbing the right material when you go out and watch films or TV or commercials or Instagram content, it doesn't matter. Developing your taste and to not only be like what's quote unquote good, but also what you like, that will stick with you a lot longer than some of the more trivial things that we get sucked into in this industry.